one of the things that we'll be talking about today is related to some of the themes that have come up earlier this morning and certainly elsewhere in the convention, which is this notion of global meeting local in terms of international research and publications. So the author of the first paper, the Language Education Review Series, which I'll tell you a little bit about, is, as Ryan mentioned, Dr. Joyce Kling, and you'll notice something about the name of her department. Have you ever seen that before? I have. Centre for Internationalization, yeah, we all got one of those. And Parallel Language Use. So even the name of the department, I think, is something worth noting, the fact that there isn't anything like that in this part of the world. Scandinavian countries have been at the forefront of looking at a lot of these very complicated relationships between English for access and English for exclusion, and how you balance those two things. So my role has been mostly to help manage the process, the first of these papers, so I'll tell you a bit about that and then pass to Joyce to tell you what we actually found out from the studies in the area of English medium of instruction. Glocal is one of those somewhat unfortunate guttural portmanteaus that doesn't sound good, but it is a very helpful concept. So I looked it up in the dictionary, reflecting or characterized by local and global considerations. And the EB was the Encyclopedia Britannica, which I also liked because of this idea of both universalizing and particularizing tendencies in social, political and economic systems, which we just heard about from the latest winner. So one of the things that English language as a world language continues to struggle with is some of these relationships in the social, political and economic. So English as a medium of instruction is about much more than the language that's being used in the classroom. It's about the whole history of English as a world language. In my work, it's been about the post-colonial positioning of English. So it's a big, complicated, messy area, which we were hoping to try and summarize in a clear and concise report, which Joyce did extremely well. The papers in this series have been commissioned by laureate international universities, and I don't think there's anyone here from laureate today, so I'm going to misquote and misrepresent them. But we've been working very closely with the curriculum manager and their vice president of languages. This is a few facts and figures. The text doesn't matter so much, but Laureate International University is a public benefit company, which is something I've only heard of in the US. They are one of the world's largest private for-profit language education institutions in the world that I had not heard of before this project. So 850,000 students as a public benefit company, free or low-cost healthcare services for almost as many, 845,000, dozens of institutions, hundreds of campuses, thousands of employees, but they're not academics. They are people in charge of these enormous projects who need to know what's happening in terms of English as a medium of instruction. They don't publish, they don't present, that is not their remit, but they're smart enough to know that for them to develop policy on this massive scale, they need somebody who can summarize what's out there in terms of what's been happening. These are some of this is from the website, the Language Education Review Series, and these are the 4 questions that we've developed. So what are the key issues, what do we know, what are the implications, and what's on the horizon? And being able to summarize all of that in such a large area was itself quite a challenge, which Joyce will tell you about. But that's the idea of the readership, is professional, non-academics who need to understand what's happening in order to develop policies.
That's not yours.
It is not. So at this point, I'm going to pass to the dog owner, Dr. Joyce Kling, and she will explain what she found.
Thank you, Andy. And I need to thank the TIRF Foundation and laureates. This has been a fabulous experience. The feedback and the interplay, and in Scandinavian we use the word sparring in a positive connotation, not like I'm going to knock you out, but it's been a sparring of discussing it and clarifying an area that I've worked in now for about 10, 15 years that is somewhat, of course to me, but to others isn't clear. And so I thought I'd take the opportunity to talk a little bit about what we've been learning about EMI in particular from the context I'm in Northern Europe and Scandinavia, but then moving to tell you a little bit about a project where we're trying to go, I don't know if we can say completely global, but looking at it from a European context, outside of our Nordic region. And when we started all this, we were searching for what definition. How are we going to define this construct? Because over the past 15 years, there have been aspects of content-based instruction, content, language, and integrated learning, integrated content and language in higher education, English as a medium of instruction, and they've all been used synonymously. And recently, we're thrilled because TESOL had a special issue on EMI recently, and Diane Pecorari and Hans Mellström provided us with an essay and a definition that we find to be a very helpful working definition, which is that EMI is a situation when English is the language used for instructional purposes. Courses are offered, the medium is English. English is not in itself the subject being taught, so these are not students studying literature or English studies, biochemistry, pharmacology, sociology, you name it. Language development is not a primary intended outcome, and that's a unique aspect. I'm going to move in here. It's kind of a unique aspect because most often we get management teams and rectors and president's office that say, great, we'll do EMI and our students will be learning English. But in this case, EMI is not, it's not a language. Language is not an intended outcome. And for most parties in the setting, English is a second language. So for example, in the context I'm in Denmark, the majority of the lecturers, the professors, are either Danish first language speakers or other first language, and the students are too. It's very rare that the teacher is an L1 English speaker. So that kind of defines, that's our construct that we're working with. Within this, we have intended and unintended consequences that there are great concerns about, and we are kind of working between, well, what are these, and what do people keep coming at us? And I wanted to go through a few of these. Some of the intended consequences, and we see this in the argument of why should we have EMI, have been the issues of increased internationalization and recruitment. In particular, our colleagues, Annette Bradford and Howard Brown, have been telling us in Japan, they have to fill the seats. There are empty universities, and so let's open it up, and we'll bring people in, we'll bring in scholars. In our case, we have situations that people just want to study with each other. We get PhDs who want to meet the local researcher. They don't, surprisingly, not that many people speak Danish. So when they come to Denmark, we have to work in English, right? And that's been part of the Nordic construct in general, is that we've always had to work outside of the local language. Global branding, that has access to the research, and employability for our graduates. Our graduates are going global, right? But there are unintended consequences, okay? There are great concerns globally about domain loss. That meaning that we're going to have industries where we no longer discuss those domains in the local language, and it's only going to be English. The need for local or general policies, and I'm thrilled to hear about policy, language policy research. It is an area that we spend a great deal of time on because we have to decide, in particular, even this parallel language use. We have long discussions every time there's going to be a conference or a meeting. What language will it be conducted in if we have a guest? And do we present everything in English for that one guest, or some of it with an interpreter? So these are things we have to talk about, just down to when we're holding a meeting, right? Increased student dropout rates. Can the students do this, right? And changing identities of students, lecturers, and researchers. We have issues about threshold scores. Yeah?
Sorry, I have a question. What do you mean by domain loss?
Yeah, so meaning that we have fields, natural sciences, for example, that can we talk about engineering in the local language? There were years ago, about 10 years ago, there was a whole court issue even when Microsoft was coming in and bringing us all this equipment. In Iceland, Microsoft had made a decision not to localize or translate into Icelandic because they didn't find it financially feasible. And there was an uproar saying, we need this translated into Icelandic so we have that domain in our L1. And so that sort of example, that we won't have those words in the local language any longer. Okay? But we do have to think about threshold scores and the life cycle of attitudinal studies and who are our gatekeepers. We're calling them, Anna Holman, who's the professor of parallel language use at the University of Copenhagen. She's coined these terms, gatekeepers and burning souls. So who's keeping us out and who wants to fight for it? Some of the implications that we're finding, we want to investigate realization of these intended consequences. About domain loss, one of my colleagues looked in Copenhagen. She didn't find there was a great deal, but we need to do more research with this. Another colleague was looking at how language policies were affecting teaching practices. We're finding that in many cases the professors themselves aren't aware that there are policies at the university and they do their own thing. But I was at a presentation yesterday with someone was saying that in Nepal and in Korea there can be consequences if you don't follow the university's policy in an exam setting or in the classroom where translanguaging is being outlawed. You must stay in English. So activities like this, or whether students are dropping out because they just can't handle the teaching. Given all these implications, and given the fact that EMI has been very local, universities, governments are either saying yes or no, but universities themselves and deans are saying, we're going to run all of our courses. In my situation at the University of Copenhagen, the dean of the Faculty of Science, which is a massive faculty, declared one day that all undergraduate courses would be in Danish and all graduate courses would be in English, and that was the way it was. And these are some of the professors who actually didn't pay attention to that particular policy. But there are aspects that are local to a faculty, but aspects that are local to a country, and we've been trying to find out, well, what's going on just in our European context, and we've been very fortunate to get money from the Erasmus program, Erasmus Plus, the European Council. And we have a project, a transnational project that's called the Transnational Alignment of English Competencies for University Lecturers. And here I'm speaking solely about the teachers. TAKE, I'm going to refer to it as TAKE. And the purpose of TAKE was to build trust and cooperation between European EMIs. And I know most people, when I say I come from Denmark, go, yeah, it's easy there, everyone speaks English. People have a very high proficiency level. And as I mentioned, if you drive 3 or 4 hours, you're out of the country. So you do have to speak another language, and it tends to be English. But we've gone through a life cycle also. And the life cycle that we've had is perhaps 15, 20 years back, where other nations are just starting now. And you have to go through the growing pains and see what happens. And so this project was to look across and say, we want to build trust between each other so that yeah, you do that in Denmark, we can't do that. Right? So see what's going on. And address the need for transparent common framework and provide support for lecturers in various contexts. Here's a map of Europe. These are our members. University of Copenhagen, Maastricht, IEDA in Spain, Rijeka in Croatia, and Turin in Italy. And the reason I put the arrows in, we've got 2 supporting groups in Delft and in Madrid. We've tried to encapsulate a circle within Europe, so east, west, north, south. We have newer countries, newer universities where Rijeka has a very short history compared to, say, the people in Spain and the University of Copenhagen, which is hundreds of years old. But to see what's going on from the Nordic countries to a place like in Catalonia where English is, in a sense, challenging Spanish as the second language when Catalonian has only now just had a generation of students. So we're working across all of these nations to find out the role of English in relation to the regional context. What's going on? What do we share and what don't we know, and how do we work together? Ryan, how am I doing on time? Okay. Good. Okay. So our objectives are to identify and differentiate between the transnational and local English medium instruction administrative and instructional needs of the partners. This was our personal goal. At the University of Copenhagen, 10 years ago, we developed a local certification test for lecturers. It's called the Test of Oral English Proficiency for Academic Staff, where we have an English proficiency test for full professors and associate professors who are teaching in English medium instruction to be certified. And it's always been a local test. And we were able to work with partners in France to see how could we apply it there, and we had very positive validation results. But again, it's a local result with no link to anything that could be understood internationally. And so the funding from this has allowed us to link the results of the TOPAS with the Common European Framework of Reference and find out what is the comparability. Also because there's been an anecdotal reference that lecturers should have C1 level. And it's always been anecdotal. No one, Renata Clayson in 2001 wrote in her dissertation, I aimed at C1 to see what would happen. And now it's written and ministries are accepting and demanding that people have a C1 level. So this is what we've been working at. I can't tell you exactly what it is because we have a big reveal in a couple of weeks, but it might be just a little lower. Just to say, we're looking at B2 plus areas through a validation. So this has been a very positive outcome from this. We are comparing the characteristics of language use across settings. We're looking at data to inform negotiations about the requirements and support being a key issue, and strengthening the recruitment and selection and induction of educators. And lastly, to increase the transparency and recognition of skills and qualifications to facilitate the learning and the employability and labor mobility. So this project, this TAKE project has, see how I made the colors the same as the logo. Tried to link that up there. We have three main outputs, and I filled the fourth circle with a final, what they call dissemination for our multiplier events. These are all Erasmus Plus activities where you spread the word. The first output is to develop a common framework of reference, and what we've tried to do is collect in a vast database the literature that's been produced at each of our countries in EMI or anything EMI related. So we've created a format for search functions going into all the different reference sources, CLIL and CBI and all of those areas. And we have a 200 plus database now of research that we're collecting. It will be accessible. It's all freeware once it's in Erasmus, so everything will be on the website. Looking at aspects of what type of research in policy, research in intercultural communication, research in attitudinal studies. Inevitably, every country seems to start with an attitude study of their lecturers. How do you feel about this? Are you prepared? And they will always say that they are ready to teach in English, perhaps their colleagues aren't. And we need to support them. My own colleagues included, same results. So, but we're doing this across the 5 countries, also so we can see, we're doing a chronological study to see what was your nation researching at what point in your learning curve with CMI. And we're doing that analysis literally these days. We all are supposed to turn these in the next 2 weeks. So that's going to be available. We're trying to collect a database of the articles that people can then access. The second is this alignment to the Common European Framework, and as I mentioned, we believe that this is going to be a really good tool for people who are also on the move, that if they get assessment on the TOPAS, they can use it for promotion, they can use it for grant applications, they can use it to maybe command a higher salary, right? To say, look, I've achieved something that my colleagues haven't, and you're expecting me to do something that wasn't in my job description. Because for many people, it really is, by the way, next week you'll be teaching in English. Right? And it's daunting. It is a daunting task. So that's a very significant output that we're excited about and proud of. The third being a teacher training handbook. We're doing a collaborative writing handbook with all 5 countries, writing essentially 3 sections. One with the focus on language, because we have regions within our group where the academic staff need help with lower language skills, proficiency development. So there will be a chapter about language. There's going to be a chapter about pedagogy, where we basically are advocating for awareness raising. We are not advocating for any particular I am somewhat against, you could say, the idea of saying that there's a way to teach in EMI. How can there be a way to teach EMI? We're talking about a medium for teaching chemistry or a medium for teaching social science. We don't do, but we want awareness raising for people to understand that we have some classes that are these multilingual, multicultural learning spaces where you may not share any of the language or the culture with your students. You may have 20 different languages or cultures. The world we in ESL, EFL know, this is new for most of our lecturers, right? But you may also have a monolingual, monocultural group where you're Danish and you're speaking only to Danes who are now, you're all using English. And it's an odd sort of space, and how can you then use translanguaging or defining or the first language to support learning and glossing and all of this? So we have a lot of questions about supporting the pedagogy for that, and the third being intercultural competence training and discussing that. The last is training workshops, and this is our dissemination where we're going to be, as part of this framework, we're also videotaping. We're going to get a corpus. Each university will collect 6 videos across disciplines so that we have a comparative corpus. And we are going to be running 3-day workshops. The people we video will have first access to the workshops, but then they'll be open. 3-day training workshops, either 3 days through a semester or 3 days in a cluster, where we will come to each other's workshops and observe and help out, but to do training and also to test drive the handbook to see how we do with training. So that's essentially the TAKE project of how we're trying to go local to more international and global, and how we can compare and learn from each other and continue to learn from each other, hopefully beyond the European context, in my case, to see how we can move forward with EMI. These are some of the points that I tried to raise in the Lear paper, and you can find out more about some general concepts. But at this point, I think Andy and I want to say thank you, and open to questions or comments, or I think we just have time for discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, Leslie Barrett. I had a question because about 5 years ago I was doing workshops on what they call teaching in English in University of Graz in Graz, Austria, and I've done similar workshops in Thailand. And one of the concerns that teachers have about the possible implications, and in both of those cases I would have said, especially in Thailand, the teachers knew they weren't C1 or B2 and did not have the confidence that they could teach it. In fact, that was part of what I tried to do, was help them show how they could teach it without being C1. But the concern they had, and I wonder if you're looking at this or if you've looked at it, was that the students, because the students didn't have the English level, and in many cases the faculty didn't, that the mastery of the content would not be as strong, and that, you know, that nobody would understand the reading as well.
Right. There is always that concern that if people
Right.
don't have, and one of our major concerns from looking at the research side is, in terms of these implications, and that's why I mentioned, I just glossed over, this idea of threshold scores.
Oh, yeah.
That we cannot assume that if people don't have the proficiency, that they can study for an academic degree in a language that they haven't mastered. And the same that someone who, I got into a lot of this EMI research with lectures because I had concerns for the professional identity of individuals who were being told you have to teach your subject in a foreign language, and you feel sick to your stomach going into class because you know you're an expert in your field. And if it's a survey class, I had one of my informants say to me, when I teach professional courses at night and when I teach PhD courses, I am the go-to guy in this country in his field. People knew his name. But if he had to do a bachelor level survey course in a room with 250 undergrads, he's just some guy. They don't know his credentials. And this stressed him because there is this level of, at what point am I no longer an expert if people aren't believing the medium through which? And I would advocate that these people shouldn't be teaching. You shouldn't put people into a position where they don't feel confident and comfortable, but we have to provide the support systems. And even more so, we know here we don't want to let students into our programs in the US who don't have a threshold language. So you're not really doing the students a service if neither party has the proficiency to be working in that area. That said, one of the things we've been able to help with by giving, on the TOPAS, people don't get just a pass-fail score. They get a long written formative feedback document and the chance for an interview and discussion, and they can then choose what they're going to do in terms of support. By telling people what they're doing well and identifying the areas, in most cases people will say, oh, my grammar is so bad, or I don't. Our findings, and my colleague Slobodanka Dimova and I wrote this up for the TQ issue, we're finding it's not the domain-specific language. Of course, it's not their expertise in their field. These are people who've been working as academics for 20, 30 years. It's the general and academic language that they need support in. We are not going to be able to move someone who is my age, their grammar, very far in a 5-week program, or even their pronunciation. But we can help them with issues of transitions and signposting and other linguistic pedagogical, not the behavioral pedagogical, not how you're going to teach. You are not suddenly going to be teaching in an active student-centered classroom if for 30 years you never have, and you have to do it in a foreign language, and your students don't have the language skills and don't have the learner training to learn like this. But we can help you with the linguistics of teaching, the linguistic pedagogy, to move you along so that you can emphasize and show people and build. If you have in your situation a monolingual group, monocultural group, it was multi, yeah. But with the monolingual group, we'll say, do the glossaries, get them talking, put them in groups and talk about, is that really what that word meant? I work with some political science students in social philosophy, political philosophy, said they need to be talking about, are they all, when they talk about man, do they understand in Danish, do they all understand, because they think they understand, but they're all talking about something else. So having those conversations in the L1 and not having what the rectors and the presidents would like, which would be this English-only room, but using your languages and diversities to support the learning. But having a threshold is kind of necessary. 5 minutes. Questions for Andy, for Kathy, for anything?
Just mention.
Yes. Yeah.
So this is focused on Europe. Have you looked at comparing this to any other areas of the world? And it'd be really interesting to look at Central Asia right now. So Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. These are newer countries that are changing from Russian to then their local language, then to, as they open up, are choosing English as a medium of instruction, and they're grappling with this right now.
We don't have a lot of connection. We've had in our unit, SIP, the Center for Internationalization of Parallel Languages. At SIP, we have been speaking to colleagues somewhat in St. Petersburg and a little bit in the southern Ural Mountain area, but no, we haven't, and we would love to. There is a brand new association which really just came to fruition. We have our association papers now for about 1.5 years. It's called the Association for Integrating Content and Language in Higher Education, ICLHE, and if you go to iclhe.org, you find out about it. Where we have a biannual international conference, and for the first time, we're getting people in more from Northern Europe because, of course, you have to have the funding to be able to get around to these places. But we're hoping more and more with a project like TAKE, where it really was local, and now we're at least across Europe to be able to then do more comparisons. Speaking to people here, Brazil seems to be exploding with EMI, and yet it's, again, without policy, it's just, let's just do it from one day to the next. So we need to be informing each other on both good practice and not so good practice. I'll just say something. One of the things that Andy and I have been talking a lot about that came up that I just mentioned in the paper is, it's not just our lectures. Right now I'm talking about the lectures, but this affects the staff, the entire staff at a university. If you bring in international students or international staff, you've got secretarial staff who suddenly have to start answering the phone in English and writing letters and documents that they didn't have to do before. We've got janitorial staff or custodial staff, is the term, I guess. People who have to show people around the campus. How do I get to place A, and you've got some guy mowing the lawn who we don't think twice about approaching now, but what do you do if you've never been in an English-speaking context, and literally from one day to the next your job changes? So the language policy issues are broad. secretarial issues, administrative. Yes. Thank you. Pat, back to you. It's back to you.